Welcome to Catalyzing Change Week. This year's Catalyzing Change Week is about solutions from the front lines by social innovators.
In 2022, Catalyst 2030 concentrated its efforts on bringing proximate leaders and frontline solutions to the forefront. Collaborations led by members from the Global South produced groundbreaking reports on climate and transforming education, with an emphasis on offering local solutions. We continued our mission to create an enabling environment for social entrepreneurs to flourish by initiating a letter to donors, signed by more than 1,200 social entrepreneurs and innovators. The Catalyst 2030 awards ceremony was spectacular, and the awards themselves welcomed by the private sector, governments, bio multilaterals and donors.
Catalyst 2030 as a movement is disruptive.
One of the best things I think that's come out of Catalyst 2030 so far is incredible collaboration across the ecosystem that just didn't exist before Catalyst came into being.
The thing I love most about Catalyst is that it's an open movement for social entrepreneurs around the world.
I would encourage anyone who's looking to be more connected with their local communities around social development goals to come along to Catalyzing Change Week.
Welcome to Catalyzing Change Week.
Okay. Scott, do you want me to put on your presentation?
Yeah, if you would, please.
Okay.
Looks like we're a small but mighty group.
Okay. Do you see it?
Yes, I do.
Perfect.
All right, let me know when we're ready. Viola, should we begin?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, hello to everybody, small but mighty group. Welcome to Prosper or Perish Handmades in 2024. I am Scott Francom. I'm here with Nilesh Yadav, and we're the Jaipur Crafts Festival, which is a festival about the business of crafts, culture, and heritage. So put questions that you have in the chat, and we'll answer them at the end. And I'll begin by saying, yesterday was kind of a big anniversary. It was the 30-year anniversary of the introduction of the World Wide Web being released publicly. And you consider the changes that have come out of that, like this virtual conference. And today, 4.9 billion people use the web, 3 billion don't use it. And those are usually because of digital divide, language, access to the tools. And of those 3 billion, we want to highlight 2 billion smallholders, who are mostly the single-family enterprises that make and bring you the world's most beautiful and delicious things. And I wanted to make the contrast between Web 1, because we want to talk about what Web 3 does for crafts and for makers in the near to medium term. These new technologies will be freer, fair, cheaper, and reach into the bottom 2 billion. Next slide, please. So let's talk possibilities. You've probably heard the saying that intelligence has a normal distribution, but opportunity doesn't. So what if the world really could be freer, fairer, more just, more sustainable, and maybe even regenerative? What if the bottom 25% could access new markets, finance, land security, bargaining power, cooperatives, greater inclusion, equity, all services that academics say that they need. What if the technology were cheap enough and powerful enough that intelligence and opportunity would be available everywhere? In other words, what would you do? What would the world be like if those 2 billion at the bottom were activated? So let's talk smallholders. Smallholders are the single family firms that create these world's most beautiful, delicious, and sustainable things. And most crafts are made by smallholders, incidentally. Global food security, crafts patrimony, our collective cultural memory, the untapped economic growth of 2 billion people would get support probably for the first time. Resilience in general reside with these 2 billion smallholders because they're the ones doing sustainable practices. They're the ones who care about land. They're the ones who do the regenerative things, and they've never been recognized, supported, or even thought much about. And I'm guilty of it. Before I started on this project, they didn't really enter my mind because there wasn't anything I could do about it. There wasn't, I don't know anybody that does that. I didn't recognize that they were responsible for things like chocolate, coffee, your favorite vegetables, farming meat. In most countries, they are the glue of basic food security. So I want to talk about how blockchain could help. Blockchain is a Web3 technology you may have heard of, probably in regard to it being the underpinning of cryptocurrencies, but it does a lot more. And it can help, but it's expensive and it has problems of scale. So holochain is a similar technology that costs 10,000 times less than blockchain. And to meet the EU challenges that are the purpose of this talk, smallholders are going to need a cheap, flexible Web3 technology. So Web 1 was, I can send an email and I can read a blog. Web 2 is what we have now, which is surveillance capitalism. It's the centralization of economic, structural, technology power in about 10 companies. And Web 3 is designed more ethically. It's more utopian. It's peer-to-peer. It shards information. So my information doesn't sit in a centralized database. A few pieces sit on your phone. A few pieces sit on my computer. And it all reassembles with this 15-digit cryptographic code that I can pull back anytime I want. And because it doesn't require data centers, it is infinitely cheaper, 10,000 times cheaper than Web 2. And it does have these capabilities that are new. And we'll talk about a little bit, but it does allow technology to begin to reach down into the bottom 2 billion. So the effect of activating these 2 billion smallholders, we think everything changes. Consumers change, the products change, your corporate strategy, your marketing, your ESG activities. And the ethos of your whole supply chain is visible to anyone who wants to look at it. And we think that makes consumers drive towards quality. So we have this prediction. Truly freer, fair, and more transparent markets generate data, they activate quality, and they create differentiation, and they promote circularity. Next slide.
The next slide. Am I audible?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Can you hear me, Nilesh?
The previous slide. In a new paradigm shift for environment, the European Union has made its sustainability poster quite clear. It has released a series of 7+ sustainability regulations that are already under effect or soon to be under effect. A detailed list of all these sustainability regulations can be found at the end of this presentation. Why do these sustainability regulations matter to India? It is because the European Union buys 36% of Indian crafts. The key agenda behind all these sustainability regulations fosters a shift from reuse, reduce, recycle to safe, non-toxic, recyclable, and repairable. Since 8% of our planetary boundaries are circular, these sustainability regulations pushed for a digital product passport. Digital product passport is a cryptographic record of cradle to grave circularity of everything that goes into your product. These digital product passports can be issued and received from GS1 standards organization in your respective country. The Eco Design for Sustainable Products Regulation, ESPR, is worthy of attention here. Around March 30, 2024, product seizures will start to begin at European customs. This regulation would be applicable in a prioritized and phased manner, with the exemption of pharmaceuticals, animal feeds, and fuel. Next slide, please.
So, towards climate neutrality and sustainable economies. These new EU regulations, this is the purpose of them. They're headed towards climate neutrality by 2050 and a sustainable economy within that big bucket of activities. So how are they going to make that happen? Data is the key that unlocks the circularity, traceability, pervasive measurement, and sustainable products. And the EU builds on this smart strategic thinking. The new policies align internal market incentives, external requirements towards those twin goals of climate neutrality and sustainable economics. So the EU sees climate change as a global problem requiring global solutions. They seem to be fine being protectionist, inflationary. They are understood as aggressive, and they're also understood as effectively doing what they say they want to do. They kind of got tired of waiting for the rest of the world to act, so they're just like, we're gonna move forward. But something else changed. So these regulations were always there, but they were mostly about climate. Something happened when Russia invaded Ukraine, that all of a sudden material supply chains and energy supply chains became part of national security. The real fear is what happens if China moves on Taiwan, because that could cause a global depression, the crashing of big economies, and advanced economies like the EU and the USA would be hurt the most. And the US is doing some of the same things by preventing China from getting our most advanced chip technology. So the EU believes that digitized supply chains supported by digital product passports are the keys that unlock the self-reinforcing twin transitions of climate neutrality and sustainable economies. I'll also mention that as controversial as these may be outside of the EU, they're really well supported domestically. Like, if you're an EU citizen, you probably understand the necessity of trying to get not ahead of, but at least address the problems that we can see right now. And this is the way that they believe it's possible to do it. And frankly, I do too. So let's talk shared value. It's not all problems. Shared value says you take your biggest problem and you turn it into your sustainable competitive advantage. In this case, national security and climate change. So what does the EU do? It tries to build new sustainable competitive advantage out of these big, tricky, sticky problems. So that's why new carbon capture technology, other clean tech pulling their supply chain back, understanding that they're going to focus on things that are clean and quality and safe for people inside of the EU. And I don't think they intend to hurt crafts in India or anywhere else, but they're willing to take that chance in order to push everybody into moving in the right directions. The other thing to note is that these steps begin to disadvantage and disengage from autocracies. So put differently, these regulations support democracy by realigning suppliers from democracies, not autocracies. So there's a certain projection of values onto our suppliers now. Next slide.
While preparing for digital product passports, you will have to keep two things in mind. The first one is splitting your origin supply chain into biotic and abiotic components. The biotic components would include everything that is living that goes into your supply chain, and the abiotic components would include soil, water, electricity, lifetime carbon equivalences, and so on. The second thing you would want to keep in mind would be to go as deep and as wide as possible. If you are a silkworm rearer or a khadi worker, the taxonomy of your origin supply chain would look in such ways. You would have to give data away for silkworm species, what type it is, what is the local species name, since when have you been practicing sericulture from, the life cycle of the silkworm, when does it begin, when does it end, the number of eggs laid, the incubation type, and all such. If you're a farmer, you will have to give away information that begins from the type of the seed all the way to the soil health, water use, and the way the raw material and the farm produce was transported. If you are a dyer or an artisan, you will have to begin the data from the use of the raw material all the way towards the weaver to the craft differentiation, including number of hands, the number of works, the number of webs, the number of family size, and socioeconomic indicators. If you are a brand, you will have to move from white label, from GS1 product passports to tailors, human resource, all the way upstream towards brands, retailers, suppliers, e-commerce shops, giving away your sustainability poster, ESG data, and sustainable finances. Next slide, please. So how exactly do you prepare for a digital product passport? The first thing is to begin with key no regret actions. Start with one circularity step or one sustainable sourcing practice if you already don't have one in place. Start making products that improve and have a longer shelf life, can be repaired, can be reaccessorized, can be upgraded. Tackle uncertainties by making an action plan. Since data for the digital product passport has to be taken from all members and partners across the value chain, you would have to ignite a conversation so that everybody is on board with the creation of digital product passport and giving away data. You would also have to open conversations about giving away design credits if you have retailers, suppliers, designers, and makers. Start by creating a baseline water footprint. Most times, the amount of water used and the amount of wastewater given out is not been accounted for. So you have to start by creating a water footprint that accounts for the amount of water used, the wastewater given, so that an makeshift strategy could be sorted that perfects itself over time. Think about how technology can support you. There is oftentimes data with product in your existing reports, in product tags. Start by collecting that data, both upstream and downstream, and then work towards finding data gaps and sources from which you can obtain data. If there are any hurdles, obstacles, feel free to reach out to us at Sustify. Next slide, please.
So now we're talking about consumers. If you think what transparent supply chains means, It means that every consumer can look into whatever they buy, trace it all the way back upstream to its origins to see who made it and whether there's any oppression anywhere in the supply chain. And most people will not support a product that is not ethical or has unethical things associated with it. But until now, products have been a chocolate box. You could only see the glossy chocolate coating, and now you can poke your finger into it to see what's inside. So there's incremental change, which is mostly what we're used to. We're talking about big wholesale, turn the table over change. And it may seem like this is far away, but we really believe it's 3 to 5 years away. So what happens when every actor has new tools and capabilities? We think it means, I'm going to restate that. So what does it mean to accommodate greater pressure from 2 billion makers upstream in your supply chain and 4 billion consumers downstream? It starts to mean, in these formal strategy terms, that you have higher forces on both ends. If the ethos is visible, who will that new consumer be and what will they want? And we think change consumers shift everything about a product, from the design, the marketing, the branding, the strategy, the positioning, the pricing, the distribution. And as things move away from a product only focus, we think there are some new intangibles. Most consumers will want their products and brands to express these new capabilities. We believe there's going to be a shift from products to mostly products plus people. We think the task, if you're a brand, if you're a supplier, to shift your definition of value creation. So let's talk how to flourish amidst the intangibles of quality, values, and meaning. For quality, the highest quality at every step in the supply chain. You want to highlight that. For values, talk about fairness at every step of the supply chain. For meaning, talk about cultural dimensions, or we'll point some other places too, but you do need to pick a spot and you have to explain where you are and why. Because once consumers get a little bit of information, they will think it's a disconnect if you push back in areas that don't feel authentic to what you're saying. So brand reshuffling, what happens when products are delinked from promotions? So the traditional marketing mix is price, product, place, promotion. But promotion is changing because I can see into it. And if I can see into it, I delink it and I take a much more sophisticated and transformed view of what I want. So the result is transforming consumers, consumption patterns, brand goals, and marketing practices. We're tracking the MSME playbook at Sustify, which will supply on a link on the end pages. So here's some ideas for alignment. You can't do everything all at once, but you can start now with whatever you can see from right here. So identify better for you alternatives with your resources. Few people can get to really pure raw materials. Do the best you can, explain it, and explain the transition and why you're moving away from whatever you're doing now to that. Design for the regulations, which means designing for circularity, repairability, and reuse. And begin to integrate both environmental and social criteria in your decision making. And then foster upstream equities. Identify where you can build the SDG goals with your closest partners. So the new consumer freedoms 2. Next slide, please. So this all seems utopian and unlikely and a little too hippie, but I want to restate that we believe everything in this presentation comes true and becomes the general business environment within 3 to 5 years. So when everything is mixed, normal brand positions will seem hollow and very crowded. So what should brands do? And we think they should look for the biggest unoccupied segment. And so what that means is that the biggest unoccupied space we think is probably lean into culture. We think another unoccupied space is going to be the Web3 differentiation. So there are over 50 new Web3 capabilities, like tracking the number of hands that touch your product to the amount of water used. So just find a place where you can shine and build around that. Another idea would be to build a trust brand where customers are confident that you are transparent and you are trustworthy. Another one would be to build a real transparency brand where customers can see the full supply chain and your business practices. Find a spot on the SDG or the emissions or the circularity and build your brand around those. Highlight support for smallholders. Remember, this 2 billion people is now activated, and they're going to start agitating for, asking for, making a mark in, contributing differently. Figure out how you can engage those, because it really will be the first time that we're bringing those 2 billion people into the formal economy. Pick a cause like regenerative soil health, quality of life, fairness in global south terms, and build on those. And we're gonna keep an ongoing list as we think through these issues, and they'll be available at the MSME support on the end slide. Next slide, please.
This slide was created in order to showcase resilience and SDG value creation between craft supply chains and electronic supply chains. Most of the craft supply chains are so community close-knit that they are often referred to as craft clusters. The raw materials that come to them are often giving them a decentralized setup. Meanwhile, electronic supply chain are linear, created to fulfill a specific purpose, from the creation of the product to its delivery, therefore are oftentimes at a centralized setup. I created the local area plan for Ward 74 for the whole city of Jaipur, and we've observed that Indian crafts, mostly intangible heritage, often showcases 13 circles of interoperability. Circle 1 being water usage, circle 2 being electricity usage, circle 3 being usage of raw materials. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation states that if your supply chain contains certain circles of interoperability or more, it is 100% sustainable or 100% regenerative. It is a fair thing to say. Whereas electronic supply chain have one giant circle of interoperability, every resource coming in and the finished product going out. Most of the raw materials that come into a craft supply chain are exclusively for the creation of the handmade produce, therefore creating primary pathways, whereas sometimes the waste produced from a different craft supply chain altogether, for example, pomegranate rinds from a local pomegranate juice maker, end up becoming raw materials for the craft supply chain, creating a secondary pathway. Other times, the waste produced from a craft supply chain is used as a raw material for a different supply chain altogether. Fabric cutoffs, wastewater is oftentimes used as water for farm produce, creating a tertiary pathway. Whereas for electronic supply chain, it just has one starting point where it creates a primary pathway and there are no secondary or tertiary pathways. The craft supply chain have the ability of receding further back, meaning they can move back from the carver or the artisan all the way towards the farm produce, all the way towards the seed, all the way towards a facilitation or a weaving center. But in the electronic supply chain, they most of the time have a definite starting point. The crafts have a great ability of moving towards ESG and SDG value, bypassing scope 3 emissions. Scope 3 emissions are generally emissions that account for A to Z of your entire supply chain, while Scope 2 emissions are the emissions that account for the organizational emission or any other resource that is outsourced. The Scope 1 emissions are emissions that are solely for the organization. It is fairer to say that crafts have the ability of moving directly to Scope 3 emissions, and that Scope 3 emissions are where the real game changer is. Meanwhile, for electronic supply chain, the ideal pathway is going from Scope 1, Scope 2, finally to Scope 3. Next slide, please. In a marketing advice, there are two ways to look at it. We discuss about all the features and talk about all the benefits. About all the features and advices that we have given you so far, we have tried to sort of accommodate them in a 2x2 graph with actionable deliverables that could be done before 31st December 2023 to move from business value CSR transformation towards shared value ESG plus on a scale of impact from low to high. You would have to look at the minimums, wherein the minimums of lead on resource reevaluation, foster upstream equities, consider sustainable inputs, have to be unanimously followed by retailers, brands, and suppliers. That is why they are the minimums. You would want to be at the higher quadrant of the graph towards quantifying a water baseline footprint, highlighting smallholder support, beginning with one circularity step, and all the way towards measures that give a high impact. It is fair to say that this might seem like stuff of utopia given by an economic mother, but this all is going to be true. Europe is not messing around. Brand entities, especially MSMEs, will have to adapt or become extinct. And getting first will eventually matter because everybody who comes after that is going to be me too. Next slide, please. This is a philosophical transformation from transactional value all the way towards transformational value. The old CSR business value model had a narrow focus on value creation, whereas the one today in between is the citizenship value, which taps into new sources of upstream value creation, moving towards shared value ESG plus, which is trying to tap into both upstream and downstream value through quality, meaning, and values. The old model quintessentially focuses on short-term profits and short-term shareholder value, whereas the citizenship value focuses more on ethos-driven revenue, maximizing value from new challenges. Whereas the shared value pretty much will thrive from the upstream and downstream pressure. The upstream pressure is going to be pressure from all the way beyond the suppliers, retailers, artisans, farming, artisans, seed growers, weaving collectives. The downstream would be points from where all the money is going to be coming in. It would be retailers, e-commerce shops, malls. It would also be the consumers. So it will have to activate pressures in order to move towards higher shareholders' value. Next slide, please.
Sorry for my coughing here. So we're returning to some OG research that was kind of the first part that got us involved and made us want to start the Jaipur Crafts Festival. So the graph on the left is what is called a commodity pricing curve. It's flat. That's every piece of goods is with the same qualities is priced the same way. A differentiated pricing model is what a healthy brand market ought to look like. So where this came from is we started noticing anomalies that shouldn't exist. We saw that a meter of hand-woven indigo khadi from Bengal was priced the same 140 rupees as a meter from Rajasthan. So why is that? It's different cotton. It's a different indigo process, different skill of the maker, different everything. Handwovens, especially these handwovens, are some of the most differentiated products in the world. Why are they priced like copper and gold and oil? Something was wrong. So a flat pricing curve means that they're understood by the market as commodities. And commodity pricing means the only way to make any money is to drive down the cost and quality of my making, which seems to be why the craft sector looks like it looks. And it's why makers are not prospering. The challenge is, if I want to make my products better, if I want to spend the extra money to use a better mordant so my dyes stick better, or I want to make a higher quality of weave or use better cotton, it's actually a form of self-harm. So these things that I might want to do, if everything's priced like a commodity, if everything's priced the same, then my quality of my sector just keeps going down, 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 down. And I think that's where we are. So the real task is how to change the curve from a flat commodity curve to a differentiated pricing curve, where I, as a consumer, know that if I want that weave from that person at that make, I know I have to pay a premium for it. So next slide, please. This is an analysis of the craft sector. So when we found these broken bits of it, we went to try to confirm what the formal economic rules of functioning markets could tell us. And what we found out is that on 4 out of 5 economic dimensions, crafts are not a functioning market. And this is also probably true of most of the smallholder sectors we'll be looking at. So those 5 dimensions are ease of market entry and exit. So traders can go in and out of the market, but the actual weavers, it takes them years, if not generations, to learn how to do what they do at a quality level. So crafts fail on that metric. Widespread availability of industry information. There's not even any sector information, much less anything that would actually help a maker make better decisions about what kind of products to make, what quality, how to price. They don't have any information. And there is this tendency, especially in India, for India to get strangled at the top and never make its way down. And where I'm going with this is that transparent supply chains actually begin to resolve these markets in the right direction. We've always said the purpose of the festival was to begin to activate this differentiation strategy. And we believe that beginning to document supply chains is a really big part of that, because it's data, it's information. Consumers can see what the difference between the good stuff and the less good stuff is. So going back down to absence of market externalities. Economic externalities are things like, do I, from my job, from my making, do I have enough money for a dignified life? Do I have enough to, for my kids to have an education, for healthcare, for savings? And that is definitely not true for most of Indian makers, and I would suspect makers globally. The next definition of functioning market is, does it make a cohesive contribution to the public interest? Because functioning markets can do anything. Functioning markets could build their own craft palace. They could have a national insurance scheme. They're definitely not a functioning metric as things are now. Please pardon me. The next metric is the absence of significant monopoly power. And we thought that was the only place where crafts might be, this might satisfy a metric of functioning markets. But even there's a cotton monopoly. Like, it functions like a union shop. The top makers that we met in Calcutta don't know what kind of cotton they're getting. They can't tell the seed, where it's grown, what the quality is, everything is rubbed out. So they have to make up for that with the hands. So they have to make something beautiful out of something that they don't even know how good it is. And that is not how it should be. So I wanted to shift to this differentiation strategy. To repair the sector, we need to change the basis of competition from price to quality. In other words, we have to shift from the flat curve on the left to the differentiated curve on the right. And makers have done the hard work. They just don't tell their own stories, which would allow consumers to identify how goods are different or better. And if I know that something is different and I want that, I know I have to pay that premium, and I'm usually willing and happy to do it. We think that's the way out. And we believe that these EU requirements for transparent supply chains could rebuild functioning markets. Next slide, please. So this is another OG tranche of research that we did, but we think it matters because right now, it seems like everything is against crafts. And these new opportunities could be an answer. So what we found is that there are external challenges from these big tech companies, which mean that every handmade item has a lower than expected sales in e-commerce. And it should make everybody mad. India should be jumping up and down mad. It disadvantages anything handmade or with ESG dimensions from being sold in e-commerce. There are kind of three main metrics there. There's something called a Google taxonomy. And these things matter because they are standardized ways for the new semantic web to be able to tell what something is. So search engine optimization used to be 260 characters, and now it can be pages. What Google wants for you to be able to succeed in search is you have to tell the internet exactly who you are, exactly what this product is, the people who are most likely to be interested in it, and lots of little micro data points like, is this for a man or woman or both? Is it new? Is it reused? All these little things excuse me, give Google the confidence to send searchers to the right place. So that's what a Google taxonomy does. It is something like apparel and accessories, clothing, outerwear, coats and jackets. But you notice there's nothing for an ESG dimension. There's nothing for sustainable. There's nothing for handmade, which means any of the good stuff gets buried under commercial products. The old problem of the internet was not enough good search results. The problem of the new internet is too many good search results. So 15 years ago, search began to develop these Web3 strategies, and one of those is something called structured data, SAO. And it's how artificial intelligence works. If something is in the third column of the fourth row of that sheet, the internet in any language knows what it is. So it's literally structured data. So handmaids are blocked from being found in internet search because the lack of structured data schemas, again, for crafts or ESG dimensions. So there's schemas for handmade manuscripts, there are schemas for clothing stores, but not for handmade clothing or handmade clothing stores. The emissions, again, mean that crafts will always be buried under commercial goods and search. Global craft economies should push for changes at the WTO, the UN, and big tech that disadvantage these crafts. Because the last area is something called HS codes. And the WTO governs these harmonized trade codes. Because they were standardized, they became part of the quality store. Hand loom, hand spun cloth that goes into a tailored bench women's jacket has exactly the same HS code as a Chinese factory-made jacket. In other words, handmaids are not measured at all. And they're continuously disadvantaged and buried in search under factory-made things, which have more searches in them, because that's how that works. So what that means is that the world's most beautiful things will always be buried under factory goods unless big tech corrects what it did. So we've got an open letter. We would invite you all to review and sign at the jaipurcraftsfestival.com. Next slide. So we're trying to help MSMEs with technology and tools to manage these transitions. You understand the challenges. In less than a year, the world's most beautiful things will be turned away from Europe unless they have a digital product passport. You understand that there needs to be a piece of Web3 technology that can document supply chains and manage these large data sets. So we're working on a project to do that. And in the meantime, we are keeping a set of MSME coaching tips where anybody could come, and most of the information from this talk, at least the actionable things, will be there. And we hope we'll hope you'll keep up with us. So this project Justify uses bottom-up reporting to document goods and qualify them for digital product passports. Next slide. These are the new EU sustainability regulations with links. Those will be, we're gonna put some links in the chat here in just a second. You may have to go 2 steps to be able to find these, but they are there. The ones that you care about are the corporate sustainability, due diligence, textile strategy, and eco design and sustainability reporting. Greenwashing won't work anymore. There are these new consumer protections about if you make any marketing claims at all, you're going to have to back it up with actual data, with actual information that can be confirmed by a third party and by consumers. So we'll have these available to you via some links. Last slide. So these are the links that will go into the chat. So one of them is a blog post, the case for supply chain transparency, and that's got the new EU regulations. Sign the open letter. It's Jaipur Crafts Festival. If you want to write us, info at, and then the ongoing MSME support at Justify. And last slide, please. We're going to say thank you and open up the floor for any questions. Still a small but mighty group. Who's got questions?
I have a small question.
Yes.
Yeah, so where do you see India's craftsmen, the hand moving trade growing in next 5 years? Despite the hurdles, despite the changes.
Yeah, I think both of us want to respond to that. So there's a real opportunity. If you have everybody who's not declaring their differentiation, just telling that story would be part of it. And we think that there'll be a big opportunity in makers that are able to take this technology, or at least say that they can trace all the way back to the raw material. We think that there's a really big place for companies to raise their hands and say, we're digital product passport ready. Unless you want to.
Well, you'll have to tell how an artisan made is different from all other rest pool of artisans. That means talking about differentiation. how much amount of buckets of water do I use to dye my fabric, the number of hands that pass through my product making, like the actual quantification. I think Handmade as a product won't sell anymore. It will have to be data. So data and products will have to be the new sale of Handmades. Getting a celebrity face for a brand endorsement when it is a hollow product that is unethical, doesn't support the community, it's just not going to sell. Because the EU sustainability regulations will make the playing field so level that unless you are a great brand with a great brand premium like Net-a-Porter, it is really going to be hard to sell products. That being said, smallholders will come to the forefront as long as handmaids and handwovens are actually repackaged as sustainable commodities, because they intrinsically are sustainable commodities. It's just that those conversations are not open. They are often talked in terms of women empowerment, in terms of microfinance institutions. They are talked as in terms of lean towards culture, but talking in terms of a lean towards sustainability, in lean towards circularity would take them a long way. Because the new age of customers is so much driven towards sustainability that there was a new Ernst and Young consumer index for 2023, which said that 61% of consumers want more information for the product they buy. And sustainability was one of the first purchasing indicators. So that says a lot.
Karsha, does that answer it, or do you have any follow-ups?
Yes, I do. I mean, that was a terrific answer, and that really touch based on a lot of doubts. But at the same time, as a follow-up question, how do you think these small-scale brands can survive the bullying of big companies, and at the top of that, the recent EU regulations being non-cooperative to natural ecosystems? How do you think they can survive?
If they don't get organized for this, we really worry that this is an extinction event. Like, it could be really bad. 36% of Indian crafts going to the EU. And I'm telling you, anybody we've talked to, for one thing, it's the first time they've heard of it. For another, they think it's going to be a jugaad. For another, they think it's not me. It's why we're jumping up and down and trying to ring the bell as many places as we can and give MSMEs some tools to begin to prepare. And I'll say that the EU deadline, our best guess is that it's March 30th of 2024. The EU hasn't been super forthcoming about it. So that date may shift a little bit, and it may be something that they can do, that little brands can do kind of incrementally with handwritten declarations at first, or promises that this is what we did, or retroactive. But within 18 months, the plans are that this date is going to have to be real time. So there may be a grace period. I mean, I don't think Europe wants to hurt anybody, but again, they're not messing around. So the minute that this starts to hit the press, that it's real and that there are real dates around it, I think there will be panic. And it's why we're just trying to create the tools that we can. The opportunity for little brands, I think, is really in getting out in front of all this. Because if you can say 200 people touched my product, this product supports 70 families, or things like that, that really are possible with Web3 through something called a roll-up. When it just starts to add up all the hands and families and whatever you want to try to collect in real time, so it's accurate, at least as declared person by person, which is in data analysis collection is considered valid, like it's not considered to be highly suspect, like it's valid, it counts, it matters, it's something consumers can rely on. Getting in front of that, declaring what the culture that it comes from is, how much water it uses, like just get ahead of it with one of those brand positions, we think is an opportunity to stand out. And that specific idea of getting organized early, raising your hands and saying, we're digital product passport ready, because European retailers are going to have the same problem if they rely on a low-cost country and skilled makers. I mean, India is sort of it. So you might be able to take, your neighbor's customer if you organize in time.
Just to add on to that, the purchase is somewhere around 28% of Indian crafts. So 50% of Indian crafts are actually sold internationally. Being the first one to be digital product passport compliant will ensure that the artisans or hand woven are tapping into an international market. If you're an artisan brand, try to look at the artisan empowerment toolbox at Paramparic Karigars Mumbai, 200 million artisans Bangalore, or creatively dignified Bangalore. That should get you started in the beginning at least.
There's another notion we didn't touch on. This isn't just Europe. It's the G7 is considering something very similar. We've already looked at what India is proposing as part of their G20 compliances. There are 13 of these buckets in total, 7 of them in the EU, but there's the New York Fashion Act, there's the US Textile Act. They all have different dimensions, but they require this kind of level of granularity at every step of the supply chain to be able to be sold out of New York, in this one case of the New York Textile Act. Yeah, the New York Textile Act. So it's not going to get any easier. It's only going to get broader. And I'll say again, it's not just, I see I have one person from another country. Ali, hi, coming to you next. But every country that makes is going to have this problem if they export to the EU. If they don't export, it's not a problem yet. But even then, they could get some customer value out of it if they act responsibly and sooner than other people to try to grab the attention. Kirsch, I'm going to move to Ali now, and we can come back to you if there's time. Ali,
okay.
Hey.
I mean, I have many thoughts. I mean, there is always a blurry line or maybe a confusion between handmade and handicrafts.
Okay.
Handicrafts by design tends to be very local, tends to be a niche market, and they always have a story or some sort of a culture behind it. And it tends to be produced by individuals or small groups or small families. And most of the time, interesting when you look at how, for example, Persian carpets, which is probably the most fanciest of all handicrafts,
Sure,
is actually, the majority is actually sold in Iran as tourism. So it's actually driven by tourism. You go to a certain neighborhood, you see how they're doing it, and you buy. Now, try to sort of push it more toward a mass production kind of a mindset.
I don't think we are.
That's the impression I got. And the issue is that when you try to force it even through just sort of export, you're actually gonna have to create a middleman. And this middleman will have to sort of collect, because that's the fastest way. I mean, there is another way, which is a cooperative or an association. And this, you find it in Turkey, for example, again, in carpets, you find it in Persia, in carpets. But in most countries, there is a tycoon who would exploit all those guys, pick up things from them. I mean, come on, we talk about modern day slavery. One of the areas, fertile areas of modern day slavery is carpet makers in India. And so, I mean, that's not an Indian story. I mean, it's obviously everywhere. And that's my first issue. My first question is the distinction.
Let me jump in there with just at least a little bit of information that these Web3 technologies are capable of including people anywhere along the chain. It's resources, events, and agents, and this person would be an agent. And so anything that he touches, there would be an indelible cryptographic mark that showed he had part of it. It may or may not show the economic advantage that he took there. But over time, his power goes down because for the first time, the 2 billion at the bottom have access to the same tools that the mogul has. So that does start to level the playing field a little bit. Please keep going with your question, but I just wanted to put those two bits in.
The last, just quick comments. When you talk about number of hands, actually this will favor a big assembly operation, not a niche handicraft. I mean, when you talk about a handicraft, carpet, for example, it's probably done by one person on his device, and he's probably going to stay a month or two to sort of finish it. So
Right.
how many hands are very little. When I talk about the shirt that is made in China, and if I'm going to sort of tell you how many hands were involved in it, you're probably going to see many things, because it's actually, this is how you do assembly operation. So the number of hands, I don't think it's a good criteria. I mean,
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. But I do want to note that carpets are different than other things. So actually having one person or one family as the artisan, and it carries his name with it in an indelible cryptographic way, to me, that would be an advantage to the product to carry it through resale in its whole life. And it would give him recognition and maybe some other things. These Web3 technologies have really interesting attributes to them that I'll just mention because I think you may want to know about them. So it can come with an economic tail. So if that maker has sold to a retailer through this other guy or not, or the retailer wants to push that back down, there can be an agreement that says when that product resells, that original maker makes 5% of the resale price. And that can be an automatic calculation done through something called smart contracts that just brings that amount of money back down. Maybe it's enough for retirement over a lifetime. As that
Fair trade has been trying to do this. Fair trade has been trying to do this.
There's a cryptographic way to do it through Web3 that is just through a set of pre-agreements done, either pushed down from the retailer, pushed down from the client, or pushed up from the maker end. I'm not going to say it's going to happen in every case, but it's easy to do now, which was one of the big hurdles before.
Well, I'll look at some of the information you're putting in the chat, and then maybe I'll get in touch with you if I have.
Yeah, feel free to come back. Your point about the number of hands in a manufacturing single line is valid, but they are different products. So I think they mean different things, and that customers can tell the difference, but you're not wrong.
Thank you. Thank you.
What else? Ukarsha, you all done, or you got more?
Yes, I'm done. It was a
Okay.
fabulous session.
Guys, thanks so much. Viola, anything else to wrap up?
No, I wanted to thank you both. So thank you, Scott. Thank you, Nilesh. If you want to share your contact in the chat, so maybe the others can keep in touch with you. And otherwise, I have nothing to add.
I think we did that. Did I put info at?
No, not your email.
Yeah, info at the Jaipur Crafts Festival. It's a small but mighty group. Appreciate you guys sticking with us the whole time. Viola, thanks for the coaching. Really grateful to y'all.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Yep. Bye.